All right, here we go. 16.4, emptying the ocean, starting on page 433. So I do have a sticky note right there, and I'll come back to it in a second. But I want to talk about this picture here. So first off, let's look at the legend. You can see basically the blues is where reefs are going to grow. The yellows and reds and pinks, that's where reefs are going to shrink. So starting at the top, 280 parts per million. We're talking about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So 280 carbon dioxide parts per million. So you can see there's a lot of the ocean where it can grow. Obviously, there's a lot of pink where it can't, and the reefs are going to shrink, but there's a big area where it can. Okay, we moved down to 2007 is when it got to 380. You can see it's getting a lot smaller. We're losing, the west coast of Peru, or excuse me, the west coast of South America, the west coast of Mexico is starting to go as well. But if we get down to 500 parts per million, just look how much the coral reefs are going to not have a place to grow. Currently, we're at about 410 parts per million. So since 2007, so in 13 years, we're increasing very quickly to that 500 parts per million thing. So what I wrote is that ocean pollution is obviously a bad thing, like we've talked about, but overfishing is much worse. We've reached the point where if we harvest more fish, they simply won't be able to recover. That's the point we're getting to. And we're going to talk about the cod population in a couple minutes here. Basically, they have never been able to recover from what happened to them. So we flip over, now on page 434. So we're talking about the fishing population that peaked in 1988. So if you look at the chart here, that's what they're talking about. So you can see the red, capture, so like, old school, the way you think about fishing. Aquaculture production, that's what's going on there. And we've talked a little bit about that before. So the fishery production peaked in 1988. Then aquaculture has been booming to help the demand. And aquaculture has its own problems going along with it. There's a lot of disease. It's basically kind of like, the feedlots of the ocean at that point. The fish, they simply don't stand a chance using all the technology we have. We got sonar and radar, we got spotter planes, we got, really advanced nets and hooks and everything. So they just don't stand a chance. Moving to page 435, I'm going to zoom out here. And this image here, I wrote know these is what I got. I got another one over here we're going to talk about with bycatch for a second, but I want to talk about these guys. So there's a thing called purse seining. So basically, the top of it has a whole bunch of buoys that stays on the surface. Then the bottom of it is all weighted. So what these guys do, okay, and these purse seines, they can be like, a half a mile in diameter. Like these things are huge. Basically what they do, they'll drive around the school of fish. Once they've encompassed the whole school of fish, they'll basically, like a purse or a backpack, they just simply cinch everything closed and they pull everything on deck. Next one, you can see is long lining. Whole bunch of buoys and a whole bunch of hooks on the bottom getting some fish. We also got drift netting. Okay, these are the guys that are going after kind of like in the more like the open ocean areas, oh, sorry, I thought I was about to sneeze. So we're talking about like herrings and sardines and mackerels. Those guys that basically school a whole bunch. They put a really fine mesh net in there, and they basically go get caught in the net. And this bottom trawling, this is absolutely terrible. So there's trawling, which is basically when they go to like kind of like the open ocean. They basically just put it kind of like in the middle of the water column. And there's bottom trolling where they literally drive it with wheels. They just drive it right along the bottom of the ocean bed, which just absolutely decimates the bottom ecosystem down there. So now we're getting to bycatch. So bycatch is by definition catching species other than what you are trying to catch. So if you're going for tuna and you catch a turtle or something like that. So in 2011, bycatch was 17%. Last year, the estimates are around 63 billion pounds of food or of fish caught from the ocean was bycatch. That's roughly 40% of everything that was caught was not what they were wanting to catch, and those things just simply get tossed overboard. And the real big problem with that is that bycatch, if you're pulling stuff up, let's just take bottom trawling, If you're pulling stuff up quickly to the surface, it's going to die. Like if you're a scuba diver and you go from 50 feet down to the surface in 2 seconds, you're going to get the bends and you're going to die. That's the exact same thing that's happening. So it's not like the bycatch just gets simply caught and you can throw it overboard and it's fine. The bycatch dies very quickly. And so that 40% we're talking about, the 40% of their fish, or the 40% of what they're pulling on board, is literally dead on arrival. They're just tossing it overboard. But regulation with that helped a lot, thankfully, but it's still a huge, huge, huge problem. So let's look at one of those charts. So right here, we're talking about basically, we're talking about tuna being caught versus the amount of dolphins. So you can see like total of all dolphins, the bycatch. You can see in 1960, 1970, it's really, really, really high. Then we got the Marine Mammal Protection Act, so it started dipping. We got increased, and then so basically you can see it increased, new fleets, bycatch reduced by dolphin safe eco-labeling. So like it's going down, but look at the overall dolphin population. Through all of that regulation, have they recovered? Not at all. Their population just got wiped down, and now it's plateaued. They're basically not climbing back up, unfortunately. So the U.S. not only regulated the U.S. fishing fleet, but also any tuna that was imported needed to be labeled dolphin safe. But like I just talked about, the dolphin population still have not recovered. But other bycatch for things is not regulated at all. So one of the things is like seabirds. I mean, they're talking like, I think it was like 300 or 400,000 seabirds a year get caught by bycatch because they're going for food or they're going for fish and they get caught in the nets. Pictures here, talking about that bottom trawling. This is before the bottom trawling and then afterwards. It's legitimately just like basically like, drive a lawnmower or till up the soil in your backyard. That's exactly what bottom trawling is doing. It just absolutely decimates it. And like I write here in 437, bottom trawling is one of the key factors to blame for codfish not recovering. Bottom trawling is similar to clear cutting and strip mining. It just absolutely just wipes out the ecosystem that's going on. An intense harvest changes those food webs as well, because you take out some key players in the food web, everything's going to change. So here's the cod population. You can see back in 1850, 1860, it's kind of going up, going up, going up, going up. Then all of a sudden, the advent of industrial trawling, this is the amount of cod they harvested. So, and what would that be? Like 10 years, they went from about 250 tons to 800 tons of cod in 10 years. Then absolutely that population decimated. It rose back up a little bit and just went to the ground. The moratorium is imposed, or basically, hey, you can't catch cod anymore. And we watched a video about that. I had a clip of that where basically those cod fishermen were just, they were trying to kick the doors into that meeting because, hey, that's our livelihood. But like, there's literally nothing to fish anymore. Same thing happened. So that was in the Grand Banks. This here in George's Bank is what this is. Same thing. So you can see trawling is the advent of industrial trawling. The amount of catch skyrockets, drops a bunch, skyrockets again. Closures enacted. So they acted a little bit sooner than these guys. Because obviously, hey, you can't catch any fish once there's no fish. These guys tried to kind of get in front of it, but still you can see it didn't do much good, unfortunately. All right, another thing, we're looking at 438 now. So even though fish stocks are declining, the overall catch is remaining consistent. But that's not due to like the populations coming back or anything like that. All they're doing, they're traveling further for fish. So instead of them, kind of going off their own coast of their own country, now they're basically buying the rights from really poor countries to fish off of their land. Fishing deeper than before. Like they used to fish, like they used to put their lines down to like 150 meters, something like that. As of like, I think 3 or 4 years ago, it was 250 meters is where they're starting to drop to now. And there's also, like it says, more effort for the same amount of fish. And there's also more bycatch for the same amount of fish to be sold. Then you can also see it's what's called fishing down the food chain is what it's called. So as the big fish populations decline, we're talking about, like tuna, for example, as those big fish populations decline, their prey is now caught and sold. So basically down the food chain. So instead of the tertiary consumer, now we're catching and selling to secondary consumers. Then they do this thing called the image makeover, which makes the new fish sound more appealing, so everybody wants to eat it. And there's obviously a loss of biodiversity, which means a loss of ecological services, which is just terrible. So this picture up here is an example of that. And like the caption says, when stocks of desirable fish crash, fishers switch to less desirable species. The once little desired slime head is now captured extensively and marketed as the far more appealing orange roughy. Because like if you went to the Applebee's or some fish restaurant or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, I'll take the slime head," it's not as appealing. And so that's what that image makeover was talking about. All right, leave some questions. We have stuff to talk about.